What if a single explosive, about the size of a washing machine, sitting silently in dark water, could hold the global economy hostage? And what if the only safe way to take that hostage back meant sending machines instead of people, because no navy in its right mind would risk a single human life inside a minefield? Here's a small favor before we begin. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and share it with one person who thinks the news is boring. It takes 2 seconds, it costs nothing, and it keeps this channel alive. Now let us walk through one of the most remarkable military operations most people have never heard of. For months, the world held its breath over a narrow strip of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Tankers were afraid to move. Insurers were quietly raising prices. Economists kept warning that oil could spike at any moment. Then, almost without warning, the fear simply evaporated. The United States announced that the most important shipping lanes on Earth were open again, in both directions, at the same time. It sounded like a headline that came out of nowhere. But the truth is stranger than that. This victory had been quietly building for months, piece by piece, mostly hidden from public view. Nothing about it was sudden. Nothing about it was lucky. It was the end product of one of the most carefully planned, deliberately quiet military campaigns of the modern era, and almost nobody saw it coming. To understand why this operation matters so much, you first have to understand the place where it happened. The Strait of Hormuz is the neck of the bottle for the world's oil. At its narrowest point, the distance from one shore to the other is only about 21 miles. That sounds like a lot of open water, but it is not. Inside that gap, the lanes that ships are actually allowed to use are far tighter. One lane carries ships heading in, another lane carries ships heading out, and each lane is only about 2 miles wide. Between the two lanes sits a narrow buffer zone that exists for one reason: to keep giant vessels from crashing into each other. That is the entire road that a meaningful share of the world's seaborne oil has to travel on. 2 narrow strips of water, 2 miles wide each, and absolutely no room for error. Now imagine a supertanker, fully loaded, longer than 3 football fields, carrying in enough crude oil to fill hundreds of swimming pools. That ship cannot stop quickly. It cannot turn sharply. It takes miles of open water just to slow down. And it certainly cannot swerve around a suspicious object the way a car swerves around a pothole. If someone tells the captain that danger might be waiting, below the surface, the captain has only 2 choices: sail into the unknown or refuse to sail at all. That is the whole trick. Iran did not need to fill the strait with explosives. It just needed to make the people who move the world's oil believe that the water was unsafe. Because once that belief took hold, the threat did the work all by itself. And here is the part that most people miss. Roughly 1/5 of the oil that the world uses every single day moves through this small stretch of sea. That is an incredible amount of energy flowing through a space you could almost see across with your own eyes. When Iran dropped its explosives into those lanes, the physical damage it caused was tiny. The economic damage was enormous. Shipping companies suddenly had to pay war risk insurance, and those premiums did not climb a little. In some cases, they jumped several times higher than normal overnight. Some ships were rerouted. Some voyages got slower. Every extra day at sea burned more fuel and cost more money. The threat itself, the fear itself, was doing most of the damage. Iran understood that better than anyone. So when American forces finally moved in, their goal was not to sweep every inch of the entire Gulf. That would have taken years and still failed. Their goal was much smarter. They only needed to prove with total confidence that one specific corridor was clean, a lane wide enough for the biggest tankers to pass, with a guarantee strong enough that captains would trust it and insurers would believe it. Once that lane was certified, any explosives still sitting near the Iranian coast simply stopped mattering. They could sit there until the end of time. They would never move a single barrel of oil because the traffic would simply sail around them safely through the trusted lane. That distinction between cleaning one vital highway instead of an entire ocean is what made this operation possible in months instead of years. Now let me show you what actually did the job. The campaign started back in the spring when American destroyers moved into the strait. Those warships were never the ones doing the hunting. They were there to hold the water, to show presence, to deter anyone from interfering, so that quieter, more specialized machines could do the real work underneath and around them. That work happened in layers, and every layer solved a problem the others could not. Start at the top. American helicopters flew over the water carrying a system that fires pulsed laser light down into the sea. That light bounces off objects and builds a 3-dimensional picture of what is floating, drifting, or resting just below the surface. The helicopter does not need to stop or hover. Its forward motion is part of how the machine builds its image. That means a single flight can scan an enormous stretch of water in a fraction of the time a slow-moving ship would need. It is the fastest layer, the widest layer, and the layer almost nobody talks about, because you cannot see it from a dock. Down on the surface, the Navy sent out unmanned boats, roughly the length of a small fishing boat, powered by diesel engines and built to run with almost no human on board. These vessels carry modular payloads that can be swapped out in port, depending on the mission. One day, a boat might tow a high-resolution sonar system that scans the seafloor from multiple angles in a single pass. The next day, the same boat might drag a completely different cable behind it, a cable designed to mimic the magnetic and acoustic signature of a much larger ship. That second setup exists for one reason. Some mines do not explode on contact. They are triggered by the magnetic field or the engine noise of a passing vessel. So the unmanned boat sails forward, dragging a fake signature, and the mine, fooled into thinking a giant warship is passing overhead, detonates against the decoy instead of against a real hull. Here's the part that should make you stop and think. In the old days, this kind of work was done by specialist warships with crews who volunteered to sail straight into a minefield. The United States actually retired its dedicated minesweeping ships not long ago, along with the heavy mine-hunting helicopters that used to tow sweeping equipment for decades. Critics warned that this was a dangerous gamble, that the Navy was giving up proven tools before the replacements were ready. Well, this operation was the first real test of that gamble, under combat pressure. And instead of new ships, the Navy brought robots. Listen, if you have made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. And since you are still here, do me one small favor. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with a friend who still thinks history is boring. It costs you nothing, and it pays for everything on this channel. Now, let me tell you about the machines that went under the water, because that is where the real work happened. Unmanned boats took over the sweeping, unmanned helicopters took over the scanning, and under the surface, the third layer was doing the slowest, most tedious, and most important work of all. Small underwater drones crawled along just a few meters above the seabed, running methodical search patterns like a lawnmower cutting grass. They used sonar to build a picture of the bottom and flag anything that did not belong there. Something resting on the mud. Something half buried in it. These are the explosives that the fast scanners miss because bottom mines do not float. They have no visible profile from above, and they do not always give off a strong enough magnetic or acoustic signal to fool a decoy. Over the course of the campaign, more than 100 suspicious objects were located on the seafloor and in the water column combined. And here is the most remarkable detail of all. Private contractors were brought in alongside military units to physically remove or destroy what the robots had found. When the job was done, as far as anyone has publicly confirmed, not a single American service member had to go into the water to do it. Let that sink in. An entire minefield, one of the most dangerous jobs in naval history, neutralized in one of the most contested waterways on Earth, almost entirely by machines. Sensors flying above, robots floating on top, drones crawling below, and human beings staying safely out of the blast radius. That is not a small operational detail. That is a genuine turning point in how war is fought at sea. And it fits a much bigger pattern that has been building across the world. Sensors pushed forward, weapons pushed forward, people pulled back. Whether this becomes permanent doctrine or stays special to this fight, nobody knows yet. But it is hard to look at this operation and believe that naval mine warfare will ever be the same. Before we go deeper, I want you to understand that this is not the first time this game has been played. It is actually almost 40 years since the last time Iran tried to choke. The Gulf with mines and the way that story ended still echoes today. The 1980s were a brutal time in this region. Iran and Iraq were locked in a long, grinding war that pulled in half the world. And when the fighting started spilling into the Gulf, American ships found themselves caught in the middle. In May of 1987, an American frigate on patrol was struck by 2 missiles fired from an Iraqi warplane. 37 sailors died. It was a gut punch the Navy never forgot. Then came the oil tankers. Iran started attacking ships carrying Kuwaiti crude, so the United States stepped in to protect them. Kuwaiti tankers were reflagged with American colors so they could sail under Navy escort, and the convoy mission began that summer. It did not take long for the danger to become real. On the very first escorted mission, one of the reflagged tankers struck a mine near Farsi Island. The ship survived thanks to its thick double hull, but the message was clear. The sea was not safe, and the United States had just been drawn into a war it never asked for. Then, in April of 1988, came the moment that changed everything. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a small American frigate, was sailing through the Gulf when it hit an Iranian mine. The explosion ripped a massive hole through the hull and broke the ship's keel. Several sailors were injured, and the crew fought for hours, pumping water and shoring up bulkheads to keep their ship from sinking. They succeeded, barely, but Washington did not respond with diplomacy. 4 days later, the United States launched one of the biggest naval attacks since the Vietnam War. It was called Operation Praying Mantis. American forces destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms that were being used as military bases, sank an Iranian frigate and a missile boat, and crippled a second frigate. The entire operation took less than a day. It sent a simple message to Tehran: if you mine these waters, we will come for you, and we will hit you where it hurts. Even more dramatic was the capture of an Iranian cargo ship caught in the act of laying mines in September of 1987. American helicopters and boarding teams stopped the ship in the dark, and there, sitting on the deck, were the mines, ready to be dropped into the water. The evidence was photographed for the whole world, the crew was taken prisoner, and the ship itself was later sunk. Iran could not even deny what it had been doing because the proof was staring into every camera lens. For a weaker navy, mines are supposed to be the perfect weapon. They are cheap. A single mine costs a fraction of what a missile costs. One small device can close an entire shipping lane, tie up enemy resources for months, and create billions of dollars in economic pain. That is the whole theory of asymmetric war. The weak side buys a box of cheap explosives and makes the strong side spend a fortune cleaning up. For decades, that theory worked. In fact, it worked so well that entire classes of dedicated minesweeping ships existed just to deal with the problem, and that is exactly why what happened this year matters so much. It just proved that the theory has an expiration date, at least against a navy with the right technology. But before you decide how you feel about that, consider this. The mines did not just fail as a weapon, they failed the people who planted them. Because this time, Iran appears to have lost track of its own minefield. According to reporting cited by American officials, Iranian forces could not fully account for where all of their own explosives had been placed. And worse, they lacked the ability to remove them even if they wanted to. Think about what that means. A professional navy lays mines with documented coordinates. It knows exactly where every device sits. That gives it the option to clear them later on its own terms when the crisis passes. That is also what countries promise when they sign agreements, to clear their own mines. Iran reportedly signed such a commitment earlier this year and never followed through. Instead, by most accounts, much of the mining was done by small boats racing out at night and dropping individual devices with almost no coordination and no central record keeping. It was chaos wearing the uniform of strategy. And that chaos has now embarrassed Tehran in a very public way, because when the American operation finished, Iranian officials reportedly floated the idea of a joint demining effort with the very navy that had just done the job without them. You plant explosives you cannot find. You lose control of the story, then you offer to help the other side clean up the mess you created, and they politely finish the job while you watch from the shore. There is a dark comedy to that moment, but there is also a lesson. A minefield you cannot control is not leverage. It is a liability. It is a weapon that can blow up in your own hand politically, even when it never explodes in the water. None of this means Iran is finished as a disruptive force in the Gulf. That would be a dangerous mistake to make. Iran still has fast attack boats. Small, quick, hard to hit, the kind of vessels that have harassed commercial ships in these waters for years. It still has proxy networks it can lean on when it wants deniability. And senior figures inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are still making defiant public statements, insisting that Iran can disrupt the flow of oil whenever it chooses. But watch what is actually happening. Tanker traffic through the strait is going up. Iran's leverage is going down, and the gap between the words and the reality is getting harder to hide. Part of the reason is the warning that came with the American announcement. The United States did not just say the lanes were open. It said that any vessel caught laying new mines would be, in the words of President Trump, immediately and systematically destroyed. You can read that as tough talk if you want. But behind the words sits an operational reality. The same web of sensors that found the first minefield, the laser-equipped helicopters, the robot boats, the underwater drones, the satellites overhead, can also watch a small boat dropping a new mine in real time. Once you have that kind of persistent coverage over a body of water, mine laying stops being a cheap, low-risk tactic. It becomes something closer to a suicide mission. And notice that the statement did not stop at the strait. It tied the mine clearance to continued surveillance of Iran's nuclear program. That was not an accident. The message was deliberate. The same network of satellites, sensors, and high-altitude radars watching the water is also watching everything else Iran does, above ground and below it. Nothing is outside the field of view. And when you add in the recent American investment in long-range, high-altitude radar systems, the picture becomes even clearer. The space above the Earth is quietly becoming a battleground of its own. This operation in the Strait is just one visible piece of a much larger shift toward treating space as part of the fight. Okay, quick question before we keep going. Would you sail through a lane that had just been cleared of mines? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments because your answers genuinely shape the videos we make next. And while you're typing, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, because the algorithms do not reward the good stories. They reward the subscribed ones. Now let me tell you why this victory changes the world economy. Because this story is not really about ships and explosives. It is about the world economy, told through the lens of the sea. For months, the practical effect of Iran's mining campaign was not that ships were blowing up. It was that insurers and shipping companies working with incomplete information and understandable caution treated the strait as a high-risk zone. Premiums climbed, schedules slowed. Some traffic moved through a narrower southern channel closer to shore, easier to watch but unable to carry the same volume as both main lanes running together. Reopening both lanes at once, with a credible American guarantee behind it, does something that no speech could ever do. It restores throughput. More ships can move in both directions in the same window of time. The bottleneck disappears. And global oil markets, which react to capacity and certainty more than to words, will feel that difference in the coming weeks. The insurance industry deserves a deeper look here, because this is where abstract leverage turns into real dollars. War risk insurance for a vessel transiting a contested strait is priced by underwriters based on confirmed incidents, credible threat reports, and the perceived reliability of any security, guarantees from the militaries operating there. And when a choke point becomes uncertain, premiums can spike within days, sometimes several times the baseline rate. Shipping companies then have three choices: absorb the cost, pass it on to customers through higher freight rates, or avoid the route entirely. None of those choices are painless, and for Hormuz specifically, there is simply no meaningful alternative. The backup pipelines that exist can carry only a fraction of the flow. That is why this strait carries the strategic weight it does. So when an underwriter in London sees a credible, publicly announced clearance operation backed by an explicit guarantee against future mining, that changes the math. It is not just about the mines that are gone. It is about the promise that new ones will be dealt with immediately. There is a diplomatic dimension too, because a choke point like this never involves only two parties, no matter how the headlines frame it. The Gulf states on the western shore, and every oil producer whose export revenue depends on tankers moving through reliably have a direct stake in this outcome. Their reactions to the mining and to the clearance will shape regional alignments for years. A demonstrated American ability to guarantee safe passage reinforces the security relationships that have underpinned Gulf oil exports for decades. It gives regional partners a concrete reason to keep relying on that security umbrella. And imagine the opposite. If this operation had failed or dragged on for years or cost American lives, regional capitals would have started asking hard questions about whether the guarantee still means anything. The fact that it went smoothly is itself a message. It will be read in Gulf capitals as proof that the old promise still holds. And here is something worth noticing about how this operation was communicated. The original mining of the strait generated enormous global attention. Spiking oil prices, urgent diplomatic cables, wall-to-wall media coverage of the most dangerous stretch of water on the planet. The clearing operation, by contrast, happened almost entirely out of public view, unfolding quietly over months, surfacing only in scattered reports about destroyer deployments and underwater drones. Then, one day, it was simply done. That asymmetry is not an accident. It reflects a deliberate choice. Minimize public signaling while the work is happening. Do not give the adversary useful information about your capabilities or your timeline. And only go public once the outcome is secure enough that the announcement lands as a demonstration of strength, not an invitation for interference. Watch for this pattern in the future. Some of the most consequential operations in the coming years will be fully finished before they ever become headlines. Hormuz is not the only place where this game can be played. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, between the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, has faced its own version of this problem. Militant forces in Yemen have used missiles, drones, and occasionally mines to threaten shipping heading toward the Suez Canal, forcing a meaningful share of global container traffic to sail all the way around the southern tip of Africa instead. And far to the east, the Strait of Malacca carries an enormous share of the world's oil bound for Asia through a similarly narrow corridor, squeezed between coastlines and crowded with some of the busiest shipping traffic on Earth. What just happened in Hormuz will almost certainly become a template. A template for how a determined but weaker power can try to weaponize geography against a much larger economy. And a template for how a technologically superior navy can dismantle that threat once it decides to commit the resources. The mix of laser-equipped helicopters, robot boats, and underwater drones used here is not exclusive to the Gulf. It is a general-purpose architecture that could, in principle, be redeployed to any contested strait on Earth. And it would not be surprising to see elements of this same approach appear in future planning around Bab el-Mandeb, or anywhere else the threat picture escalates. There is one more layer to this story that rarely gets told, and it is about the people, or rather the lack of them. For most of the 20th century, Mine countermeasures were one of the least glamorous and most personnel-intensive jobs in any modern navy. Dedicated sweeping ships needed crews willing to operate inside an active minefield. Divers had to physically inspect and disarm suspected devices by hand, swimming down to a weapon that might explode at any second. The whole process was slow by necessity because moving too fast meant risking a ship and its crew over a single miscalculation. When the Navy retired, its purpose-built minesweepers and the helicopter squadron that once handled towed sweeping, many experts called it a capability gap, a bet that unmanned systems would be ready before the gap ever mattered in a real conflict. This operation was the first large-scale test of that bet under genuine operational pressure, and by every available indicator, the bet paid off. That matters far beyond this one conflict, because it suggests the broader strategy of replacing certain kinds of risky, crude platforms with robots is not just a budget preference. It is operationally viable when it counts. And that is a lesson every Navy in the world is going to be studying for years. If you are still with me, here is the honest truth. This channel runs on viewers like you, not on ads and not on algorithms alone. So do one small thing. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who thinks the news is boring. After this, they will not. And if you want more untold stories like this one, you know where the bell is. Now let me take you home, because the ending of this story is worth hearing. So where does this leave us? Let us pull the camera back and look at the whole picture. For months, Iran held a card. It could point to, even if it never fully controlled it, the threat that the world's most important oil choke point could be closed or made dangerous at will. That card is now gone. Not because of one dramatic battle and not because of a single spectacular strike, but because of a patient, layered, mostly invisible campaign that dismantled the threat's credibility piece by piece until there was nothing left to hold over anyone. The mines are gone, the fear is fading, the insurers are relaxing, and the tankers are moving again. What Iran does next will tell us where this conflict goes. It could lash out with its fast boats, looking for a symbolic win to show its own people. It could lean harder into proxies, looking for ways to hurt without being caught. Or it could turn inward, trying to manage a population that is exhausted by economic pain, by a currency that keeps losing value, by sanctions that keep biting, and by watching their government spend scarce resources on a sea campaign that failed in front of the whole world. External military setbacks do not automatically bring down governments. History is full of regimes that absorbed battlefield losses and held onto power. But setbacks like this remove one more pillar from the story a government tells its people to justify their hardship. And that erosion, compounding month after month, is not nothing. There is a deeper lesson here about the nature of power in the modern world. The cheapest trick in warfare, a box of explosives dropped into the sea, built to make a superpower spend millions to clean up after it, has met its match. Not a bigger bomb, not more ships. A web of sensors, robots, and software that made the trick pointless before it could even begin. That is the quiet revolution underneath this whole story. The balance between cheap weapons and expensive defenses is shifting, and the side that owns the sensors is the side that gets to decide what the sea is worth. So the next time you hear about a faraway strait, a tanker delay, or a spike in oil prices, remember this operation. Remember that underneath the headlines, a completely different war was being fought. Not with dramatic explosions and rolling cameras, but with patience, with machines, with months of quiet work and dangerous water, done by nobody in particular, in the name of everybody. The Strait of Hormuz is open again, the oil is flowing, and somewhere in the Gulf, a small boat that once raced out under darkness to drop death into the water now has to think very carefully about whether anyone will ever let it get away with that again, because the sea keeps its secrets badly and the machines are always watching. That is the world we live in now, and it may be the most important thing you learn today.